Imagine a world where Adolf Hitler never launched World War II. No blitzkrieg tearing through Poland, no trains carrying Jews to their doom, no bombs falling on London, no Hiroshima, no Cold War. Could all of that have been avoided simply because a bullet arrived a few months earlier? A stray bullet, a sudden heart attack, a successful assassination plot. History's greatest upheavals often hinge on moments that seem insignificant. And in the case of Adolf Hitler, a gaunt man with a fanatical gaze and a razor-sharp voice who dragged the world into the horrors of war, his disappearance before September 1939 might have steered the entire 20th century in a completely different direction. 1939. The brink of catastrophe. By January 1939, Adolf Hitler was one of the most powerful men in Europe. He had rebuilt Germany's military might, erased the humiliating terms of the Treaty of Versailles, annexed Austria, seized the Sudetenland, and torn apart Czechoslovakia. The German people, once drowning in post-war crisis and poverty, now believed they were living through a revival. But the world beyond Germany watched with growing unease. Britain, France, and even the Soviet Union were closely monitoring every move of the Nazi dictator. By the spring of 1939, Hitler was preparing his final plan to fulfill his grand vision, the invasion of Poland. An act that would inevitably spark another great war, just 2 decades after World War I. The question is, what if, at that very moment, Hitler had been dead? A fragile turning point. What could have changed? The idea of Hitler's early death isn't far-fetched. He had narrowly escaped death in World War I, survived multiple assassination attempts, and was far from healthy. Several plausible scenarios could have unfolded. A successful assassination by internal Nazi opposition, such as conservative military factions skeptical of Hitler's reckless political gambles. A health crisis. Hitler had a history of Parkinson's and heart issues. A heart attack in 1939 was entirely possible. Even a foreign-backed strike, though less likely, British and French intelligence had considered covert operations to disrupt the Nazi regime. But if Hitler had truly died in June or July 1939, before the invasion of Poland was set in motion, what then? The Nazi machine was more than just Hitler. Who would succeed him? This is one of the central questions of this alternate history. Would Hitler's death dismantle the entire regime, or simply change its leadership? At the time, 3 figures were seen as potential successors. Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, Hitler's officially designated successor. A pragmatic politician, but corrupt and indecisive. Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS, a fanatical and ruthless figure, but lacking administrative skill and unpopular with the traditional military. Rudolf Hess, deputy Führer, blindly loyal to Hitler but lacking vision and real power. None possessed Hitler's divine authority, the cult of personality that held the regime together. Without him, Germany's elite could have plunged into a leadership crisis, giving traditional conservative forces, especially the military, a chance to regain control. The world's mindset before 1939. War wasn't the only option. One crucial detail. Before September 1939, Europe was not yet at war. Despite Hitler's invasions of Austria and Czechoslovakia, the West still hoped for peace through appeasement. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain's policy of concession still held sway. If Hitler had vanished then, the West might have seized the chance to de-escalate, re-establishing diplomatic ties with a post-Hitler Germany. Avoiding war, at least in the short term, could have been a realistic political choice. But would that have been enough to alter history entirely? Pressure from within. The Nazi Party was not a monolith. While history often portrays the Nazi Party as a unified bloc, it was actually a fragile coalition of factions. The military, party loyalists, industrialists, secret police, and masses radicalized by propaganda. Hitler was the glue holding them together. Without him, cracks would have emerged. The military wanted to restore traditional order. Industrialists sought stability to protect profits. The SS clung to terror as a means of control. When these interests clashed, the inevitable result would have been infighting, or even an internal coup. So if Hitler had died in the summer of 1939, just before the largest war in human history, would Germany have still invaded Poland? Who would have taken power? Could World War II have been avoided? Or was Nazi Germany's path too deeply entrenched to be altered by a single death? Göring takes charge, a Germany staggering on the edge of war. One July morning in 1939, Berlin awoke to an eerie silence. No chants of Sieg Heil, no motorcades roaring down Unter den Linden. News spread like lightning. Adolf Hitler, the Führer of Nazi Germany, was dead. The official cause? State media declared it a sudden stroke. Other rumors, quickly suppressed, whispered of poisoning by his inner circle or even a quiet military assassination. But one thing was certain: the man who had led Germany from despair to delusions of grandeur was gone. And the nation stood on the precipice of war. Hermann Göring, the unpopular successor. According to Hitler's handwritten succession order from 1934, Hermann Göring, Luftwaffe commander and one of Hitler's closest allies, was next in line. This had been publicly known, yet even Göring himself never expected it to become reality so soon. In 1939, Göring was a complex figure, a decorated World War I pilot, the architect of Germany's Air Force, and a skilled political manipulator. But he was also infamous for his corruption, decadence, and, most critically, his lack of Hitler's magnetic charisma. Shortly after Hitler's death, Göring addressed the Reichstag, declaring, "Hitler's legacy will live on in us. But today, we need peace to secure Germany's future." This single statement shook the foundations of the Nazi regime. The alternate scenario: Nazi Germany steps back from the brink. Under Göring's leadership, Germany did not immediately invade Poland. The reasons went beyond Göring himself. The German military, still loyal to Prussian traditions, doubted the feasibility of total war. Industrialists, who had profited from rearmament, now feared sanctions and economic collapse. Diplomats, sidelined under Hitler, regained influence, pushing for negotiations with Britain and France. From this, a new chain of events unfolded over the next 5 years. Short-term consequences: a Europe on edge, but not exploding. No invasion of Poland, at least not yet. With Hitler dead and Göring unwilling to gamble, the attack was postponed indefinitely. Instead, Berlin and Warsaw engaged in tense, if unproductive, talks, giving the West no reason to declare war. Britain and France breathed a sigh of relief for now. Chamberlain saw this as proof that appeasement had worked. France, exhausted from World War I, had no appetite for another conflict. Europe entered an early Cold War standoff, hostile, but not yet bloody. The Soviet Union grew uneasy. Stalin, who had signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with Hitler in our timeline, now found himself isolated. The USSR accelerated its influence in the Baltics and might have invaded Finland sooner, but without the pretext of Western aggression. Jews and minorities were, temporarily, safer. Without war, large-scale genocide like the Holocaust was unlikely. Persecution continued, but the death camps never materialized, the most profound humanitarian difference in this timeline. Long-term consequences: a divided, but not destroyed, world. No World War II, but prolonged tensions. Without global war, Europe settled into a protracted geopolitical stalemate. A half-war, half-peace dynamic emerged, resembling a Cold War between European powers rather than the US and USSR. America remained isolationist longer. Without World War II, the US didn't ascend to superpower status as quickly. Isolationism dominated Washington, and the American economy recovered more sluggishly from the Great Depression. No United Nations, no NATO, a fractured world order. The post-war institutions designed to prevent conflict never formed. This could have led to a less stable world in the long run, with no clear mechanism to manage disputes. Fascism didn't die. Undefeated, Nazi Germany might have evolved into a stable dictatorship, akin to Franco's Spain, rather than collapsing entirely. World without war. But was it better? A world where Hitler died early and Göring took over wouldn't have been a utopia. Millions of Jews might have been spared, London might never have been bombed, but without the crucible of war, democratic institutions wouldn't have been tested, fascism wouldn't have been fully exposed, and the world might have simmered with hidden dangers. Without World War II, there would have been no Marshall Plan, no NATO, no US rise as a democratic superpower. Who would have arbitrated global conflicts? Would we have lived in a world of stagnant dictatorships, competing in the shadows? Did history truly change? Or was this just a brief pause before the gears of fate resumed their turn? The inevitability of conflict? The core question remains: was World War II the product of Hitler, or an unavoidable consequence of World War I? Historians remain divided. Some argue Hitler was the irreplaceable catalyst. Only his manipulation, cruelty, and extremist hatred could have sparked such a devastating war. Others contend that Europe in 1939 was a tinderbox, waiting for any spark. After all, the post-World War I world was never truly rebuilt fairly. Germany was humiliated and strangled by the Treaty of Versailles, fueling public rage and middle-class despair. Italy felt betrayed, denied its promised rewards, paving the way for fascism. The Soviet Union, isolated and paranoid, feared capitalist encirclement. Britain and France, exhausted, despised war but refused to confront extremism. Against these forces, could the death of one man, even a dictator as powerful as Hitler, have truly defied the tide of history? Göring, the preserver or the procrastinator? Göring was no reformer, no democrat. He was a pragmatist, willing to retreat to preserve power, willing to bargain to survive. But in a Nazi party still riven by factions, Himmler's SS, Goebbels' fanaticism, ambitious generals, a hesitant Göring might have only delayed war, not prevented it. A troubling possibility emerges. Instead of war in 1939, it might have erupted in 1942, 1945, or later. Different in scale and circumstance, but inevitable nonetheless. Would a stronger, rearmed Germany have won? Would the USSR, not blindsided by Operation Barbarossa, have seized Eastern Europe sooner? No one can say for sure. But the danger would have remained. And without war, then what? Suppose, optimistically, that Göring kept Germany from total war. Suppose Europe remained in a tense peace through the 1940s. What then? A world where fascism endured in a semi-peaceful state like Franco's Spain. Communism expanded in the shadows, funding leftist movements across Europe. Western empires, Britain, France, clung to colonialism longer. And crucially, no free world as we know it. Without war, America wouldn't have risen as a democratic hegemon. Without war, the UN wouldn't exist. Without war, humanity might never have confronted the depths of brutality, and thus never reformed. A world without war does not mean a better world. Why alternate history matters. So, in the end, would Hitler's death in 1939 have truly changed history? Perhaps. But more likely, it would have only delayed the inevitable. And that's the point of these what-if scenarios. Not to seek certainty, not to say, history should have gone this way, but to remember that history is never a single path. Every decision, by a leader, a nation, or an ordinary person, can become a turning point. A fork in the road where the world might have veered in a completely different direction. And by imagining these possibilities, we understand the present better, because so much of today stems from past choices. Cherish what we have more, because none of it was guaranteed. Become more cautious about the future, because it, too, could be reshaped by a single bullet, a single vote, a single fateful day.